Alright, so in this video we're going to continue with linear equations, and we're just going to be going over a few changes in linear equations. So if you remember last time we talked about the general form of a linear equation, and that was y equals mx plus b, where m is our slope and b is our y-intercept, or basically uh, where our graph is going to cross the y-axis here. Okay, so now we're just going to see what happens if I change the slope and what happens if I change the y-intercept individually. Okay, so let's go over that. And the way we're going to do that is we're going to have a few equations of lines. We're going to get some points that are on those lines, and then we're going to graph them on this piece of graph paper, and we're going to see how that changes the line. Okay, so the first one that we're going to graph is going to be y equals x. And this is going to be kind of like our main graph and the graph that we're going to make changes to. This is as basic as it can get. Okay? So let's see what we have here. If we were to make um, a little table rather, there we go, that's a nicer table. And we had a y coordinate and an x coordinate. How do these two relate? Well, let's pick a random x number. Let's say it's number 2. If x is equal to 2, if I plug that into this equation y equals x, what does y equal? Well, when x is equal to 2, I would have y equals 2. So when x is equal to 2, y is equal to 2. And we can do the same and say, well, what if x is equal to negative 2? Well, if I plug that into this equation, I would get y equals negative 2. So y is equal to negative 2. And so these are just going to be our points that we're going to use to graph on this graph paper. Okay? So those points are the x coordinate 2 and the y coordinate 2, as well as the x coordinate negative 2 and the y coordinate negative 2. Pretty simple. Okay, let's move on to the next one then. So our next kind of line that we're going to want to graph is y equals negative x. And again, we'll do the same thing. We'll do a little table here. We'll have y and x, and we'll do the same thing. Well, what happens when x is equal to 2? Well, when x is equal to 2, y is equal to negative x. Negative x is negative 2. So y is equal to negative 2. Okay, and what happens when x is equal to negative 2? Well, then y is going to equal negative times negative 2. Okay, so there's negative times negative 2. So in that case, y is going to equal positive 2. And again, we've gotten two sets of points that we can graph here. So we have 2 comma negative 2. Remember, this is our x coordinate and this is our y coordinate. And here we have negative 2 comma 2. Okay, great. Let's do two more lines here. So the next one we'll do is going to be y equals 2x. Okay, and again, we'll have our graph y and x. So let's say when x is equal to, let's not do 2 this time, let's do 1. X is equal to 1. What is y going to equal? Well, y is going to equal 2 times 1. 2 times 1 is just 2. And when x is equal to negative 1, y is going to equal 2 times negative 1, which is negative 2. And great, we have another set of points here. 1, 2, and negative 1, negative 2. And let's do one more, kind of just to be safe here. Our last one is going to be y equals negative 2x. And again, we'll do a little table, y and x. And for this one, we'll also do positive 1 and negative 1. So when x is equal to positive 1, y is equal to negative 2. And when x is equal to negative 1, y is equal to positive 2. And we have our final set of points here. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to graph all of these points and see what we get. So let's graph this first set here. 2 comma 2 and negative 2 comma negative 2. And now all we have to do is connect these 2 points with a straight line. Now I'm not very good at this, so as you can tell, but we're going to try our best here to connect with a straight line these 2 points. That's good enough. and we'll label our line y equals x. Okay? And then we'll move on to the next line. So the next line is we got to graph these points, 2, -2. So 2, -2, and as well as -2, 2. So that's going to be up here. Okay, and these other lines I'm going to do in kind of a dot with a dotted line, just to show that, again, our initial line, or our line that we're going to be comparing all other lines to, is going to be this black line that I drew here initially. Okay, so that's kind of our main line, and we're going to compare all of the other lines to it. Don't forget to label your lines here. So this should be a solid line, but I'm just making it dotted for the purpose of explanation. Okay, let's graph this next line here, 1, 2, and -1, -2. And again, I'll connect it with a dotted line. If you had a ruler, this would be a lot easier. And you could imagine this is a straight line. So this is y equals 2x. Okay? And then finally, we'll do this last line, and we'll graph 1, -2, and -1, 2. And again, we'll connect it with a dotted line as best as we can. And now it's time for us to analyze these lines and see what is happening to them, how are they changing, maybe why are they changing. Okay? So let's take a look at it. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to look at our initial line, y equals x. And we're going to see that if we look at this line, starting at the left-hand side of our graph here, and moving our eyes to the right, kind of as if we were reading a book, what is happening to this line? Well, this line is clearly going upwards. It's like a hill. It's an upward hill. Okay? And if I really wanted to, I could measure the angle of this line. The angle isn't too important, but if I were to measure it, it would be 45 degrees. Okay? So from one axis to another axis, it's 90 degrees. From the x-axis to this line is 45 degrees. Okay? So that's what I notice about our line y equals x. Nothing special. If I take a look at this blue line, y equals 2x, what I notice is that if I look at it from left to right, it's a lot more steeper than the black line. Okay? And if I were to measure this angle between the x-axis and this blue line, I would see that the angle is a lot greater. Okay? So what this is telling me is that this line is a lot more steep. Well, what's making it more steep? Well, let's take a look at our two equations. Our one equation is y equals x, and for the blue line, our equation is y equals 2x. The only thing that's changed between those two equations is this number 2. So what I can assume is that as this number gets bigger, the steepness of the line is going to get more and more and more and more steep. Okay? So if I had something like y equals 3x, or 4x, or 5x, or 10x, then this line would be extremely steep. Okay? Maybe to the point where, I wouldn't even be able to tell how steep it is. I would just maybe assume that it's a vertical line. Who knows? So it can get really, really steep. And on the other hand, if we look at this red line, we can see its equation is y equals -x. And if I compare it to the black line y equals x, I can ask myself, well, what has changed between these two equations? Well, the only thing that's changed is the negative. And what I can say is that if there's a negative in front of the x, then our line, instead of going upwards from left to right, it's going to go downwards from left to right. It's going to be a downhill. Now, it's important to note here that if I were to measure the angle again for the black line, it's 45 degrees. For the red line, it's also 45 degrees from the x-axis. Okay? Except in this case, instead of it being upwards 45 degrees, it's downwards 45 degrees. Okay? But the angle is the same. And if I look at the green line, y equals -2x, we see that it's more steep than the red line. Okay? And it's also going downwards if we look at it from left to right. And I can imagine that if I had y equals -3x, or -5x, or -10x, or -100x, it would just get more and more and more steep. Okay? And basically what we've discovered here is that this number in front of x, okay, in this case -2, sorry, in this case -2, -1, or +1, +2, this number as it changes will change the angle of our line or the steepness of our line. And if we go back to our equation of a line y equals mx plus b, we can see that that number is m, or slope. So what we can say is as slope changes, that will change the steepness of our line. Or if I want to be a bit more specific, I can say the more positive m is, remember m is slope, I'm just lazy, I don't want to write slope, so I'm going to write m. So more positive slope means or is more steep. Okay, more steep. Okay, and I can also say that the more negative m is, well, that means less steep, or rather more steep in the opposite direction. In the opposite direction as positive m. It's not less steep because technically this y equals -2x is more steep than y equals x. It's just more steep in the other direction. Okay? So before I even do any math, I can take a look at the equation of a line and figure out how steep is this line going to be. Okay? So that's everything, discussing slope and how slope will change the steepness of our line. Okay? In the next video, we're going to talk about this one, B. We're going to talk about y-intercept and how it will change how our line looks. Okay? So that's coming up in the next video.